Just one more thing before we begin with our lesson that, you noticed in your bulletin that John Lawanson was leading singing, and you said, that's not John. But John got called to Florida. His daddy is seriously ill, and John is there with his dad, and so I know that they would appreciate remembering the Lawansons in your prayers at this time. And so keep John in your prayers. He's down there with his family. In our scripture reading, as you talked about, it talked about count it all joy when you fall into different temptations and such, and it goes on to say that we may be complete. Another version would say to be mature. So I'm going to talk about being mature as Christians, growing up as Christians. What does it mean to grow up and grow old as Christians? What does it mean to be mature as Christians is what we'll talk about. And so, we talk about physically, growing old is mandatory, growing up is optional. And we talk about that, and you can kind of see that if you look around, and sometimes it is that, that those who are older doesn't necessarily mean that although they grew up, it doesn't mean that although they grew old, doesn't mean that they grew up. That's what it's saying. Yeah, growing old doesn't mean that we grow up. And so it is. What about Christians, though? You say, well, I've been a Christian 10, 20, 30 years or so. Does it automatically come just because we are old as a Christian, that we are mature as a Christian? Same thing physically, same thing spiritually. Just because it is that we have been Christians 40 or 50 years, does that automatically mean that we are mature as Christians? We'll look at that. And we'll talk about the book of James, first of all, what maturity is not. When you say, just because when we say what maturity is not, number one is not just because you grow older in age. It doesn't mean that you're mature. Now look at the next slide, Or our appearance. Just because someone is 80 years old, you say, well, they're mature, they're 80 years old, or they're 40 years old, they're mature. Now, I remember when thinking 30 years old, surely that you can't get any more mature than 30 years old. 30 years old, you ought to know everything, until I got 30. And then I said, boy, that's young. The 30's young. Y'all remember, when you get to be 30, you'll remember Jerry saying 30 is young. And you'll know what I'm talking about. Yeah. I remember my senior year, homecoming. I was 18 years old. And it was 1976. That's young, They honored those 1956 graduates. 20 years. They were 38. They didn't even need walkers to walk out there on the gym floor. I was amazed until I got to 96, and I remember those graduates saying, these people graduated in 76. And I'm thinking, I was young. 20 years later at 38. Just because you grow older in age does not mean you grow more mature. Or appearance. You may look old. Look at some of these teachers last week of school. They look old. Right? Julie's in the nursery right now. I can talk about that. She won't know. Just because you look older doesn't mean that you're mature. Just because you have a lot of accomplishments. We're going to honor our seniors for their accomplishments in graduating high school. And we have some who have graduated college and some who have graduated college who we don't have their information on yet, Sean. And we will get that and put that up on the screen too. And to acknowledge that, because that's great accomplishments. But just because you accomplished a lot of things doesn't mean that you're mature. Or just have all that you have in academics and such. And so you can have all these things, what maturity is not. But let's look at the book of James. See what maturity is. Maturity is, it's not age, but it's an attitude, I believe. Look at the next screen. Not measured by age, but it's measured by attitude. You can have a young person who is more mature than an older person. You can have someone who has not accomplished so much in this life as we would measure accomplishments, but they're much more mature than someone who has accomplished a lot. And so when we talk about maturity, James talks about growing up, that you may be mature. That's what he's saying. Let patience have a perfect work, that you may be perfect and entire. Some of your versions may have that you may be mature. And so he talks about, what does it mean to be mature as a Christian? What does it mean to grow up as a Christian? It doesn't mean that you're a Christian just a long time and so you're mature as a Christian. It doesn't mean that you've accomplished a lot of things as a Christian, so you must be mature. And so there are 5 chapters in the book of James. We're going to talk about 5 particular things out of these, and each chapter will highlight something where he says, this spurs us on to maturity. James chapter 1, we're positive under pressure. That's maturity. We have pressures that come our way. When he said, count it all joy when you fall into different temptations, when you have the trying of your faith, the trials and tribulations of life, the temptations of life. How do you handle that? Do you handle it with maturity or immaturity? Is what he's saying. Because all these things can spur us on to be mature, can help us to grow up as a Christian, can help us to see and handle life. Because trials and troubles, temptations, tribulations come our way, young and old. Young and old. Just because you grow old doesn't mean you don't have trials and temptations and tribulations. We know we have them when we're young. How do we handle them? Positive under pressure. He said, count it all joy. I have not run across anyone that says, boy, I'm so happy today. I've got trials and tribulations coming my way. I've never had anyone just say, boy, it's a great day because of all the things that I'm having to go through. But you know people that are still upbeat and still joyful and still positive, because even in the midst of trials and temptations and troubles and tribulations. How can they do that? They're mature. They understand life has ups and downs in it. They understand that. They understand this is something I'm going through. It doesn't last forever. It may seem like it's lasting forever, but it doesn't last forever. And we'll get through it. And I will be the better for it. I'm positive under pressure. Pressure comes our way. So how do we handle that? That's mark of maturity. Someone once said that Christianity is a lifestyle, not a religion. You see the difference? It's all the time it is. Not only are we positive under pressure, but we're loving toward other people. In James chapter 2, he says this, that if you want to be growing up as a Christian and growing mature as a Christian, you love people. That's one of the marks of maturity. And so he said, you keep the royal law found in Scriptures. Love your neighbors yourself. Do we love one another? Or is it that we love you as long as things are going right? As long as we're in harmony and unity together, we love one another. As long as you behave yourself and I'm behaving myself, and then we can love one another. Well, he didn't say just love one another just when everything's all right. He said love one another. Even when they turn against you and say things against you. You know, would Christians do that? Yeah. Yeah, it happens. You mean when Christians are not nice to us? In fact, are just the opposite? Yeah, it happens. We get hurt by words and deeds from our brethren. And he still says, love one another. Because we're mature enough to do that. You know, it is whenever we're kids and we have best friends, and then our best friend says something or does something, and they're not your best friend anymore. You go home and say, you know, they're not my best friend anymore. They did this. So that's it. And then the next day, you're best friends again. Because you can get over that. We need to sometimes behave like children in that respect. Just get over it. Be best friends again. Don't hold grudges. No. Some churches are torn apart and split for years and years. Some, in my lifetime, never resolved it. We've seen it when churches have such disagreement. Now we have the North Side and South Side Church of Christ because we couldn't get along with each other. West Side and East Side or whatever. Brethren, a mark of maturity. Are you listening? Love one another. This is not just for the New Testament. This is God's law for all time. Love one another. And he goes on to say in James chapter 2, verses 1 through 6, he gets kind of specific. We're just going to highlight some things. He said, this is loving one another. He said, don't show favoritism. Don't be a snob. Don't look down upon people. Don't judge by appearances. Don't insult people. And he just has a little highlight list, just one after another after another. And this is love. Don't show favoritism. And you could put in parentheses, all the time. All the time. Not just at some time. All the time. Don't show favoritism. Don't be a snob. All the time. This is your lifestyle. This is your character as a Christian. Don't look down on people all the time. Not just when we're at church. All the time. This is you consistently. That's loving one another. Read James chapter 2. Bam, bam, bam. This is how you behave. This is love. Love one another. Characteristics. When your enemy is hungry, you feed them. You bless those who curse you. In Matthew chapter 25, when he talks about the Christian life, he said, I was hungry and you fed me, and I was naked and you clothed me, and I was sick and you visited me. You're mature as a Christian. And so it is. Number 2, be loving toward other people. Number 3, let's look at James chapter 3 and see what he says. In James chapter 3, he says, oh, what about our mouth? In Bible class this morning, we went in the book of Colossians, and we talked about the old man and the new man. And Paul, writing to the church at Colossae, would say, this is the difference between the old man and the new man. And he said, put off things that we would say with our mouth. Slander, gossip. What about? If you want to be mature as a Christian, control your mouth. He gave some illustrations as a boat with a rudder, the rudder controlling the boat. He gave another illustration about a horse and the bit and the bridle, being able to control the horse. And he said that being able to control your tongue is such a little thing. The rudder is such a little thing on a boat. The bit is such a little thing on a horse, but it controls them. You're in control of your tongue if you're mature. And so many times it is that we say, oh, I didn't mean to say that. It just slipped out. Whoop, just slipped out. Someone once said, well, it wasn't in there in the first place, it wouldn't slip out. Right. So we need to watch what we say. We watch what our heart is. If we want to be, he says, perfect, another word is mature instead of perfect. Perfect, complete, mature, used interchangeably. If we want to be mature, we watch our mouth. Watch what we say. The old saying, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. I don't know who said that. I've been hurt by words for a long time. Hurt by words. Yeah, it hurts. And you may say, well, I was mad when I was angry when I said that. That doesn't count, right? If you were mad when you said it, that didn't count? No. Even when we're mad, master your mouth. Be mature. Be able to bite your tongue and don't say it. Because once it's said, you cannot take it back. Cannot. And so in James chapter 3, he said, you watch what you say. Watch your mouth. Watch that tongue. You go to the doctor, and you have a doctor's visit, what does he say? He says, stick out your tongue. Well, we're going to measure your health physically, sticking out your tongue. Why do you stick out your tongue? You've got to ask a doctor about that, I guess. Stick out your tongue. We're going to see how you are physically. Well, maybe we need to say, well, stick out your tongue. We need to see how you are spiritually. How's your tongue? How are things going? In World War II, there was a little saying that said, loose lips sink ships. I was wondering if I could say that. Yeah. They're saying we don't need to let people know where we are, or we won't be there anymore. Watch what we say. Some people just say, well, you know how I am. I just say what's on my mind. Sometimes you don't have very much on your mind when you say it. Right. You kind of speak it proudly. I just say what's on my mind. You know me. I don't hold back. I just say it. You read the book of James again. He said our words ought to be controlled. It's like a rudder. It's like a bit. It's like a spark that grows into a fire uncontrollable. Watch what we say. Yeah, don't just say it. Control it. Mark of maturity. And then James chapter 4. Characteristics of a mature Christian is one who is a peacemaker. We have wars and fightings among the Lord's church. Can you imagine visitors coming in and we are fighting with one another, arguing with one another, bitter toward one another, angry toward one another, and it shows, and there's just a feeling of tenseness in the church. You ever been there? It's not good. You ever been there at a family reunion where that has gone on? And that's what we are. We're having family reunion every Sunday. Well, it's not good for family to fight with one another. We're family. Always family. And be a peacemaker. Not someone from which comes wars and fightings from among. It ought not to be, but it happens because we're not mature. And we let little things just go and fester and simmer and continue on till it just divides the church. We war against one another. Listen, we're not at war with one another. Ephesians chapter 6 said we're at war with the devil, and that's enough. We can't spend time fighting with one another, or the devil's winning. You know, he's just sitting back saying he is our enemy, he is our adversary, and as long as he leaves the fighting with one another, he's done his job. Split the church, or have the church die. Yeah. When comes wars and fighting? You know, mature Christians are peacemakers. Jesus said in the Beatitudes, peacemakers. And then last of all, we can go to James chapter 5. It's patient and prayerful. In James chapter 5, the word patient, or a form of it, is mentioned 5 times. In James chapter 5, the word prayer, or form of it, is mentioned 7 times. And so we see in that short chapter, the time and time again, he talks about patience and prayer. And he uses the illustration of Elijah prayed 3.5 years for it not, and it didn't rain. That's patience. And that's prayerfulness. Sometimes it is whenever we pray and we think God says no. And God just says, not yet. And we need to be patient to be enough on God's timetable and not our timetable. God, I asked yesterday, why didn't you answer it? Been praying a whole week, and you haven't answered it. And we grow impatient. And sometimes the answer is not no, it's just not yet. He said, be patient and establish your hearts, for the coming of the Lord draweth nigh. And we look back and said, well, the Lord has not returned in 2,000 years. And some may doubt, is he ever going to come? It's been 2,000 years. How long is 2,000 years to God? Not even that long, is it? I've been reading from some of your mothers post on Facebook about you seniors. And they say, where's the time gone? Well, here they are in kindergarten, graduating kindergarten, and graduating high school now. Where is the time? 18 years, 12 years, 13, 14 years, whatever it took. The 12, it's just flown by just like that. Where is the time gone? And 2,000 years is nothing for eternity. God is patient. Time is nothing. Well, it is to us, and we grow impatient, and we grow time conscious. Be patient, because God is in control, and you are not. Be patient. And then he said, confess your faults one to another. Pray for one another. We need to be patient as Christians, and we need to be prayerful as Christians. When it is that to be mature, constant in prayer, persistent in prayer, pray without ceasing, 1 Thessalonians 5, verse 17. The effectual, fervent prayer of a righteous man availeth much. Elijah was a man just like you, he would say. He prayed that it would not rain. For 3.5 years it did not rain. Prayerful and patient. If it can happen with Elijah, it can happen with us. And so as we talk about maturity, just because we grow old doesn't mean we grow up. Remember these 5 things. Characteristics of a mature Christian. Chapter 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And we're patient under pressure because we have pressure. And we are loving toward others. Not just loving those who love us, even loving our enemies. Master your mouth. That takes a lifetime, doesn't it? But that's a mark of maturity. Someone who is a peacemaker. God is a God of peace. Peace between man and God, and peace between one another. And then someone who is patient and prayerful. Oh, we need it. We need prayer, and we need patience. So how are you doing? Are we growing up, or just growing old as a Christian? Some marks of maturity. And so as we talk about being mature and acting mature as Christians, he calls us to grow up, to be mature. If it is that you have been thinking about becoming a Christian, maybe talked with someone for some time, been studying about it, thinking about it, why not now? Why not respond to the gospel invitation right now while we stand and while we sing?